Hey, what's up everyone, Danny here. In this video, I want to show you this PC. You've actually seen this before on the channel, but not as it is right now sitting in front of me. You saw this a while back as Casey's really old PC that desperately needed upgrading, the one that I secretly swapped out to give him a very long overdue PC update. That was a super fun video, and you should definitely check it out if you haven't seen it yet. I'll have it linked in the cards as well as in the description. After doing that switch, I took Casey's old PC to eventually make some kind of video with it, since he didn't really need it anymore. And well, here we are. This is the video. I finally got to it after over a year later, and in this video, I want to show you some pretty basic and what I think are very reasonable upgrades that I did to it to modernize it and breathe some new life into it. So let's check it out right after this. This video is probably sponsored by Slick Deals, a website that I've talked about since the very beginning of my channel and have been personally using for over a decade to find the best deals. They have a new and completely free desktop browser extension to help you save money. When you're shopping online at your favorite retailer, you can click on the Slick Deals extension and it will automatically show you the best deals that the website has to offer, as well as site-wide codes that are active. The codes are automatically added at checkout, so it saves you from having to copy and paste them manually. The best deals are upvoted to the top by the community, and there's a discussion thread alongside each one in case you need more information. You can also create alerts, which is pretty important in this day and age when popular PC hardware is constantly going out of stock just minutes after becoming available. What I love about Slick Deals is that it shows me great deals for all aspects of my life, not just PC parts. I'm talking about groceries, tools, clothes, supplies for the house, things that we all buy year-round anyways. If there's a deal to be had, then the Slick Deals community, which is made up of over 12 million monthly users, is gonna find it. You can then take all that money you save and spend it on PC parts, of course. But don't forget to use the Slick Deals extension so that you can save money while spending the money that you previously saved. There has never been a sponsorship on the channel that has more synergy than this one, no cap. If you're interested, you can install the Slick Deals extension using the link in the description below. It's available for Chrome, Edge, and Firefox. And now, back to the video. So when I took the PC out of Casey's hands, these were the following specs. The processor is the AMD FX 6300, cooled by the stock heatsink and paired with the MSI Gaming 970 AM3 Plus motherboard. The graphics card is the Gigabyte WindForce Radeon HD 7850, which has a whopping 1GB of VRAM and 900MHz base core clock. For memory, there's 8GB of HyperX Fury DDR3 at 1866MHz, powered by a Corsair CX600M semi-modular power supply, and it's all being held together by the Cooler Master Storm Scout case. There were no hard drives since those went into Casey's new build when I did the swap. Those were carried along with it. So for this build, I'm using an old Corsair 256GB SSD that I had laying around as the boot drive. It's kind of hard to put a price on a build with those specs because it's kind of old, and I think those aren't parts that anyone should be purposely looking for here in 2020. Those specs were considered brand new back in 2012, which was 8 years ago, but despite being that old, the processor and motherboard have surprisingly retained their value, making them hardly worth buying right now, standalone unless you're like a collector or something. Buying them for price to performance, I think, is a pretty bad idea. If I had to slap a price on this parts list though, I'd say it's worth around $200 based on the following prices, which would be the max I would pay per component considering their age. I benchmarked the build as I originally got it, and the results were pretty bad. You'll see later in the benchmarks portion, but in a lot of the tests, the VRAM usage was well over what the 7850 had on board. Some titles just weren't even compatible with it too because it was so old. The system was in dire need of an update, but not before being cleaned up first because it was filthy when it came into my possession. I'm not exaggerating, there was dust all over. The first thing I did to start the cleaning process was take it outside and take the high-powered electric duster to it. This was not your ordinary level of dust though, this was caked on dust. It needed a full deep clean. So that's exactly what I did. I completely disassembled the build and I cleaned each component to the best of my ability with good old rubbing alcohol, rags, and a toothbrush. When it came to choosing upgrades for this PC, I asked myself, what meaningful things could I do to make this PC feel new again without sinking more money into a dead-end platform and without breaking the bank either? And this is what I came up with. The highest priority was definitely replacing the graphics card. 1GB of video memory simply doesn't cut it in this day and age. That amount hasn't cut it for years actually, so I really commend Casey for using this card well into 2019. But I replaced it with this card, the RX 580. This is the Sapphire Nitro 8GB model. I picked this up a while back on hardware swap from a miner who was getting rid of a bunch of them for $100 each, and that price would be considered a really good deal right now during the pandemic. For $100, there are a handful of other comparable cards I could have gone with. Anything from the Polaris lineup from AMD or Pascal from Nvidia works really well for this. So basically anything 2016 or newer that was mid-range. The next upgrade I think most people would consider optional, but I think it was definitely worth it, and that's replacing the super underwhelming stock AMD cooler that came with the FX 6300 with the tried and true Cooler Master Hyper 212 Evo. I think there's a lot of benefits that make this worth it. Aesthetically, it looks 100 times better. Noise-wise, it's way quieter. And then most importantly, thermally, it's just much better at cooling. The stock cooler was already having trouble keeping the 6300 cool during heavy CPU workloads. It was already treading the thermal margin line, giving the 6300 no room to boost. With the Hyper 212 Evo in there, I was able to overclock and squeeze out some extra performance from the 6300, giving this end-of-life product one last chance to really shine. This upgrade only cost $20. These coolers go on sale for this much pretty regularly, and I usually pick them up for older builds like this. The good thing about this upgrade in particular though is that it's technically not a money sink as it's not tied to the platform. Sure, we're using it to enhance a super dated AM3 Plus processor from 2012, but when the time comes to jump to something more modern like Ryzen or one of the newer Intel platforms, this cooler can come along for the ride and be just as useful on the new platform, so it can be carried over. And now for the last upgrade that I did, which is definitely the least important upgrade when it comes to performance, but I think it leaves the biggest lasting impact on the overall mood of the build, and that's changing out the case. Now don't get me wrong, the CM Scout case is pretty awesome. I have a huge soft spot for cases with beefy rugged handles, but that thing is over 10 years old now, and it came out back in 2009. Everything about its design is pretty dated, from the acrylic side panel with the fan mount for it, the 5.25-inch bays in the front, the big bulky hard drive case that can hold up to 5 drives, a number that I don't see many people using these days with the advent of SSDs as well as external storage solutions. I replaced it with the Lynnwood LandCool 215, an awesome looking case that came out fairly recently, and is actually one of my favorites to come out of this year. It comes with two huge 200mm pre-installed addressable RGB fans behind the open mesh front panel, which promotes plenty of airflow, and it also has a 120mm exhaust fan as well. The side panel is tempered glass, there's a power supply and hard drive basement, the tray holes are grommeted, and there's plenty of space on the backside for cable management. It also includes a fan and RGB controller hub in the back, which is perfect since the motherboard doesn't have RGB headers. This case comes in at only $80, which I think is a great price considering how feature packed it is, and it would be a good fit for both systems, new and old. Now, relative to the $200 value of the original parts list, you could say that this is on the pricier side, but consider this. The case, much like the cooler and the graphics card upgrades, can be carried over when this build inevitably gets a complete platform update, which is kind of due for. Putting money into the case definitely nets the least amount of performance gains. I'll be the first to point that out. But that $80 spent wouldn't have been enough to get a new CPU, motherboard, and RAM anyways. I think the 6300 in the system, especially overclock, does have some time left on it. So I thought, why not let it live out the remainder of its life in something sweet and looks as good as the LandCool 215. That's kind of all personal preference. You could definitely go with a cheaper case, but I think the 215 was a great pairing for this. So those were the upgrades that I made. Now let's take a look at the transformation. Here's the new build. Alright, so now the build looks like it belongs in 2020, but what about the performance though? Like I said earlier, I tested the build in its original state, so I'll be showing it directly side by side with its new and improved form. Here are the overclocks on both the original and upgraded configurations. I did try to overclock the RX 580, but I couldn't get any meaningful increases while keeping it stable. This Sapphire Nitro card already has some pretty nice boost clocks out of the box though, so it wasn't really a big deal keeping it at stock. Results from the original system will be shown here on your left, and results from this upgraded system will be shown here on the right side of your screen. All games were tested at 1080p. However, a lot of them were run at lower settings to tailor to the HD 7850 that was in the system to get the most playable experience out of it. And I wanted to keep the settings the same, of course, for the apples to apples comparison. But yeah, other than that, sit back, relax, and enjoy the benchmarks. So there you have it. What a night and day difference, right? Here are all those results summarized on a single screen. For the gaming benchmarks, the average FPS is shown. Just look at those percentage differences. Again, note that a lot of the games were run at lower settings. The upgraded system does actually have some room to crank up the quality in some titles, and it will still be able to maintain at least a 60 FPS experience. It kind of goes to show that as long as you have a processor with at least 4 threads and somewhat decent clocks, a lot of the heavy lifting can be done by the graphics card to give you a very playable experience. You just gotta, again, keep your expectations in check, since we are dealing with a processor that came out in 2012. Don't expect it to push super high frame rates on everything unless it's like pretty light esport titles. One thing I did want to point out though is on some of the tests, we were operating near the total system memory capacity. I think 16 gigabytes could increase the performance a bit more from what we just saw, and it wouldn't have been too expensive either. It probably would have cost around like 20 to 25 bucks to get 2 more 4 gigabyte modules. This was something that I actually thought pretty hard about, and at the end of the day, I decided not to include it in the upgrades list because it would be putting money towards a component that could not be carried over in the next round of upgrades, which again would be the platform jump. So we would be going to DDR4 later. I know a lot of people out there have older systems and may not be able to afford doing something as drastic as building a completely new system or even doing a platform jump. So I really wanted to showcase how you should kind of think through some of your next potential upgrades. You know, think about what can be carried forward into the future versus what would get left behind on a dead platform, and invest wisely. Prioritize what is most important to you, whether it be getting the, biggest performance boost or having a nice looking PC that you can proudly showcase on your desk. Whatever you want, and just go for it. But think about it a little bit. This was a long overdue project, and I'm glad I was finally able to get it done and share it with you all. Despite not being the best system I've ever worked with, this build is still very important to me because of the history behind it. This was Casey's very first PC. He bought it with his own hard-earned money from his very first job ever, and he actually ended up using it for far longer than most people use their systems for before upgrading. Because of this, I wanted to give it a proper refresh and dignify it one last time before the last of its original parts became completely obsolete. I want to ask you now though, how do you think I did, and what would you have done differently? Would you have gone for the RAM upgrade to get it up to 16 gigabytes of RAM? And what about the LandCool 215? Do you think it was too pricey and out of line, or do you think it fits well with this build? Let me know down in the comment section below. I'm really curious to hear all your thoughts on it. I think you could kind of go either way, or a lot of different ways with a project like this. And with that said, I want to thank you all as always for watching and supporting the channel. It means the world to me. I hope you all have a happy holidays. Stay safe out there, and I will see you down in the comments as well as in the next video. Bye.